Welcome back to the Progressive Pastor Podcast, where we explore the intersections of justice, faith, and the church. JT, how's it going, bud?
We have quite the episode today.
This is the one. This is the white whale we were searching for, right?
Yeah, and we got it six
episodes in. This is the final episode.
This is it. Yeah, we can only go downhill from here. Today we are joined by the inimitable. Is that the right usage of that word? Inimitable.
Sure, yeah.
The fantastic Reverend Dr. Deb Krause, president at Eden Theological Seminary. Woo!
The studio audience is going crazy. Yeah.
Deb, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. We're so excited to have you. If you could take a minute or two and just introduce yourself to the listeners, tell us about your denomination, your background, the types of ministry you've done, the types of ministry you're currently doing.
Great. Yeah, I'm Deb Krause, president at Eden Seminary. I'm also on the faculty in New Testament, and I've been here since 1992, the fall of 1992, so a very long time. I am a graduate of this institution. So I graduated from Eden in 1988 and went to Emory University's Candler School of Theology, where I pursued a New Testament concentration PhD in religion, and was blessed to be hired by my favorite school in the world. So it was really a dream job, and I have no idea how that happened, especially given how I behaved as a student. But God is good, and I was welcomed to the faculty by my former professors as a colleague, and have felt very much like the school's mission and purpose aligns powerfully with my vocation. And so in many ways, it's just an amazing place for me to be and ultimately raise our children. My husband's a pastor, and so the life of the seminary and the mission of the seminary connect with both of our vocations and our sense of purpose professionally and socially and personally. So it's been a beautiful place to be and community of which to be a part. And I've been here, like I said, for 30 some odd years, and again, do not know how I got called to be the president, but that too has felt like a great expression of my, not only my love for this school, but my sense of purpose to be a part of empowering institutions that equip and empower congregations and leaders for the progressive Christian movement. And Eden has stepped into that sense of purpose with more and more clarity in the last 20, 30 years. It's always been a school that has, particularly in its association with the United Church of Christ, but also in its evangelical German heritage, aligned with this very pragmatic understanding of blessed are those who hear the word of God and do it. And that piety of the evangelical tradition that I believe is a gift to the United Church of Christ, and a gift to this like flowering of mission agencies that came out of the evangelical church, and that flourish today, serving the needs of the poor, meeting people where they are, and advocating and working on changing structures of domination and oppression. I'm so proud of that heritage and that connection. So all of that just feels like a really big blessing to be a part of a community with that kind of legacy and to be able to be the president here. So it's that's who I am, and that's what I do, and that's how I feel about it.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Love that. Well, I mean, that's for our, I don't know if I've mentioned this on one of our episodes yet. I'm working on my doctorate of ministry here at Eden, and that heritage is why I came here over other, there's lots of great doctor of ministry degrees at great institutions, but I wanted to focus on this tradition of liberation that's long been a part of Eden's heritage. So that's great. So you did your MDiv here.
I did.
And then went and did your PhD. So was academic ministry always the plan? Did you spend time doing parish ministry, or did you consider that, or?
So I didn't. I mean, as a student at Eden, because our contextual education program in our master's degrees is so focused on contextual learning, I had the benefit to be a part of a congregation for 2 years while I was in ministry, and I felt very much a part of the staff and part of the pastoral ministry there. But beyond that, while I was in graduate school, I was a church secretary. So I have worked in churches, but not as a pastor.
Yeah.
And so that is not a point of preparation I have. And I have colleagues here who have served in churches prior to pursuing their PhD or while pursuing their PhD. And that is a wonderful asset.
Yeah.
So we are kind of mixed in the faculty that way. Not everyone on the faculty has served a church, but I've often been challenged, especially when I was new to the faculty, by students and alumni. Oh, well, how can you do this? And I really have leaned into the truth that I do serve the church in the role of the spouse of the pastor. So my husband is the pastor of First Presbyterian Church, St. Louis, and he's been a pastor the whole time I've been here at Eden. And so we are deeply engaged in the church and the church's life, and I feel like I have a front row seat to all aspects of that in all kinds of ways. So I'm not saying that makes me a pastor, but I feel like I know a little bit.
Shout out to Bill.
Shout out to Bill. Shout out to Bill Perman.
Yeah,
Yes,
Bill's
the
the
Reverend
best.
Bill Perman.
Yeah.
Also known as
Bill.
Pastor Bill.
Pastor Bill.
That's awesome.
So getting to do this with him, and so it's this kind of fun rhythm we have that I'm, as often as I can be, I'm in church on Sundays at First Pres, which is at Delmar and Midland and U City, and then he lives here because we have to live on the campus. That's in my contract as president. And so we kind of, back each other up in our
that's awesome
work lives.
Yeah.
Bill and Deb were just predestined to be here at Eden.
It was
because
the
they're
place to be.
Presbyterians and we're Methodist.
Oh, yes, we were.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm
We
picking
can
up
cut
what you're
that. We can
putting
cut
down.
that. We can cut that.
Nope,
That's
stay in
the-
it.
Nope, we
Nope.
can cut that.
Nope.
Well,
The
Deb,
capability.
thank you so much. Now, Deb, for Lent this year, you have given up drinking one of our favorite things, beer and wine and the like. But you have very graciously brought us an alternative here.
An elevated alternative.
Yes.
Elevated. Ooh.
So this is Odyssey Mushroom Elixir, sparkling blackberry lemon twist. Just full disclosure for the listeners, we are not sponsored by Odyssey. We're just trying to be.
Yet.
So
Not sponsored yet.
we're trying to get them to.
Odyssey, if you're listening, and we know that you are.
Obviously
phone,
you are.
Odyssey.
Yeah,
Yeah.
give us
Yeah.
just a minute. So we're going to give this a try here real quick because I've never had one of these. So is this
Listen
similar?
to that crack. Listen
It's
to
a
that,
deep purple
get it.
color.
that fuzzy. That
So is
that
this-
fizz is coming through.
So
It's
is
not
this
fuzzy.
like a,
it's
is this like a
fizzy.
kombucha or is it like adjacent to a kombucha?
It is not a kombucha. I don't think it has probiotics, but it
Okay.
has cordyceps. I think that's how you say that, and
Yeah,
lion's
okay.
mane, which are two
Some green tea.
adaptogenic
Lion's mane.
mushrooms,
Okay. Here we go.
and
Cheers.
Cheers.
and
Love that.
other, as they say, nootropics.
It's expensive
Honestly-
equipment. Please don't spill it. Yeah.
Honestly, not nearly. I was expecting
A
to,
mushroomy flavor.
Yes,
Yeah.
not what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Much more.
It's pretty good.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, it has a flavor to it that I think when I drink it, it's like that must be the mushrooms.
Yeah.
But it doesn't taste like a mushroom.
I really taste like the green tea and the lemon.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
that's
I
the
can see
predominant
that.
flavor.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Wow.
Well, especially as Methodists, we are allowed to consume alcohol in moderation, but we cannot have it on our church property or purchase it with church funds, etc. So this would be a great alternative.
I can see
again.
communion changing next month.
I mean,
so.
what if
Oh
we-
yeah, intention with a little
Yeah.
Odyssey
We just-
elixir.
We just talked about that. We had an episode with Jacoby, and we had talked about that at the beginning of, variations to the traditional bread and juice or bread and wine.
Yeah.
It's really a juice.
I mean, we could
Yeah.
certainly work in some Odyssey.
I don't see how we couldn't. Yeah.
I mean, we can run it up the flagpole when we get back. But
Okay.
well,
It says that it boosts energy, and what does it do to mood? Improves or
let's see. Boost energy. It says boosts energy, focus, and mood.
focus? And
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a
Mood
boost.
boost.
Well, when this episode gets really intense because we're just so focused on our conversation,
Yep.
it's
You'll
going to
kn-
be the drink.
You're
Yeah.
gonna know why.
Well, at least we will. Deb's not drinking.
That's true. Deb's-
an Odyssey, so
yeah.
we're going to be real focused. And
That's
Deb's going to
true.
be
And I'm
loosey-goosey
only
over there.
I'm only not drinking one because I didn't have another cold one. I had to put
Oh.
it. I had a few that weren't in the fridge, but I'm just having a regular kombucha. But
Oh.
it too is delicious.
We
Very
appreciate your
generous of you.
sacrifice.
Oh,
Yes,
no, really.
very much. Very much in line with the Lenten season.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you so much again, Deb, for being on. So we had talked about this briefly before we started recording, that it may be easy to think about academia and activism as things at opposite ends of the spectrum. Here at Eden, we really bring those together, and you've really brought those together in your ministry and your career. So I'm curious if you could speak to that, of what does it mean to you to be both an academic and an activist? How do you hold those in tension and bring them together so they speak into one another?
That's a great question. I think that a couple of things, just for me personally, as a teacher here, Eden is very committed to the pursuit of knowledge,
Yeah.
charis, grace.
Got it.
And those two terms really frame the understanding of the pursuit of knowledge and learning here, which is to pursue learning in God's word, in God's presence, in the traditions of the church, and theology related to thinking about who God is and who God is calling us to be. Do that deeply. Go to the library, learn, study, tear up the text, all of that. But that the frame of that is always the grace of God, which is known in and through community and known in through communities. And that requires being in the world. That requires not being in the ivory tower, if you will. And so that, I think, is a part of that piety of the evangelical tradition that founded this school. And it's an understanding that the church is called to be in the world, hearing the cries of those who suffer and responding, a real Matthew 25 kind of framework for mission and practical theology. And so that has been in the curriculum for 100+ years. And so that, I think, is Eden's way of understanding this, what we now talk about as academics and activism, particularly in our context, as we were a part of and experienced the cries of God's people in Ferguson after the murder of Mike Brown in August of 2014. And that happened here, but of course there have been many people who have been killed by the police prior to that, and
Sure.
following that, unfortunately. And so that it wasn't like we just woke up to this heinous, oppressive reality of racism on August 9th, 2014. But our student body, really, as leaders of churches in North County, many of them, and in St. Louis, challenged our community to hear.
Yeah.
And so it was really the students
Yeah.
that led the school and deepened the faculty's engagement in the movement. And so that was how it went. And so activism, it wasn't, I never considered myself an activist. I considered myself a teacher. And being a teacher put me in relationship with students who are religious leaders and who are connected deeply to communities, who came here to equip themselves with knowledge and an understanding of God's grace to empower them in their leadership of their communities. And in that conversation, I learned from them.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm unique in the faculty that way. I think I don't think that's unique to Eden. I think that's something that's a phenomenon of education. So we're always learning from our students. But because Eden is a graduate school and our students are adults and they are about ministries and commitments that align with my own, it's a closer conversation in some ways. It's very intimate.
Yeah.
And while we can be in different contexts, particularly around the way structural injustice works, I think it's a powerful community with the diversity of students we have in very different contexts of ministry. We have white students, we have Black and brown students, we have students from other countries, and we can wake each other up to hear the cries of God's people in ways that we've been formed not to hear them.
Yeah.
And so I think that's another way in which the community of learning and academic work became activated as a community that moved out with intention to raise our voices and put our bodies into spaces to say, we're not going to have this anymore. We're outraged, we're angry, we demand that our country, our region, take note, and that these systems, particularly around policing in the courts in St. Louis, begin to change.
Yeah.
So for you, you kind of hit on this a little bit. And I liked the way that you described, just being on the outside of Eden. I'm not a student here. I like the way that you described the relational aspects between the professors and the leadership and the students. But, you are the leader of this institution. So as you have these close relationships with the students, what pressures or added nuances are there to being one of the leaders of the educational voices of an institution that is kind of at the forefront of this progressive Christian movement?
Yeah, I mean, I think during Ferguson, I was on the faculty and I was dean. And I never imagined that I was engaging in activism. I happened to, the very first thing I attended was a prayer vigil in the parking lot of the Ferguson Police Department on the day after Michael was murdered. And Tracy Blackman, who was a graduate of our school and is a good friend, called me and said, "Deb, you need to be here." And I went because she told me to. I don't think I had ever been to Ferguson before, which speaks a lot. I mean, I'm born and raised in St. Louis.
Sure.
So it speaks a lot about the way we are fragmented and segregated. And but I went to Ferguson because she challenged me to come and invited me to come and said, "We need you here." So I came. And so I didn't do that. I didn't think I was doing that as the dean and as a professor. I was doing that as Deb. But I did invite people to come with me if they wanted to come. And so I took a few people with me, and they happened to be students. And because I put an email out and some students responded. And I realized driving up there, I'm responsible for these people. And in some profound ways, I'm taking them to this place and this activity. I don't know what it's going to be.
Sure.
And I don't know what we're going to do. They volunteered to go. I didn't say this is a part of a class, you have to do it or anything, but And so there you have it. At once I'm doing it as Deb, and yet because of my role, I have this institutional responsibility, and that throughout the Ferguson time was really a powerful back and forth. I would say a dialogue. So I heard from other colleagues, I heard from the president, I heard from alumni, I heard from trustees during those first months, especially, as I might be in the paper, a picture of me describing who I was. And I was a couple of times. So there were a few who would call and say, that's not good. This is too political. You're putting the seminary in a controversial space. And again, I was like, wow, I didn't even think that, but I guess I need to own that I'm doing that. So what is my rationale here as an educator, as a academic dean, as a leader of the faculty and the curriculum? How does this activity connect with our curriculum? How does this activity connect with our mission? And it seemed absolutely clear to me how it did. And then I became very focused on honing that clarity and sharing that in those spaces, bringing that into faculty meeting, bringing that into my teaching, bringing that into interface with other administrators and trustees. I went to coffee with a few trustees. I really, it's important to meet people where they are. And this is pastors, right? You can't just say, oh, that jerk disagrees with me. That's...
You can't say that, JT.
No, I've tried. It hasn't stopped me from trying. But,
I mean, you can say it in your head. But,
or to each other,
But to bear the fruit of ministry that I believe we're called to bear or to work toward, we have to find a way to be present with people who disagree with us and are angry at us. And those were really good experiences. And so, and what I would say is that the school through that, and I wasn't alone. I know other faculty were also taking that kind of heat. Students were, lots of our alumni and churches similarly were getting a lot of pushback from their congregations about preaching about Ferguson or being out on the street when they should be doing other things. So those kinds of negotiations were going on everywhere. And I was just in my own set of negotiations. It really helped to be in a relationship with a lot of different clergy through Metropolitan Congregations United and other interfaith clergy in the region who we would come together and kind of share notes on how we were feeling this pressure and encourage one another and support one another through that. So, and we made a few kind of public statements together about our activism and spoke about it theologically to try to help teach people about how we understood these things of faith and this activism to be going together. And it was good to do that in a group, rather than alone.
And so I know, you were taking on kind of two different I mean, you were doing the institutional stuff at Eden and having conversations and being in a relationship there, but I know you were very much on the front lines of this move. I mean, you were out there on the streets a lot, and we had a conversation last year during our summer intensive when Dr. Gould, our other theologian in residence for that event, we were talking about Ferguson, and I distinctly remember this because I just do. She said, Deb was arrested more than anyone.
That's not
at
true.
Ferguson.
That's not true. That's not true.
I'm sure there's some hyperbole.
There is a man named Josh Williams who's in jail currently for just the most heinous violation of anything that could be called justice. And
we spent some time talking about him.
I think he's a political prisoner, really, of that movement. And he's coming up for parole soon, I think. But I mean, there are so many people who
yeah.
really paid with their lives
Yes.
and their time and money
Yeah.
and jobs.
Yeah.
I didn't lose my job.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, I mean, that experience of, what it was like being out there and dealing with that aspect of activism while trying to balance and negotiate what's going on here at Eden? There's still things happening on the streets, and we need to be out there, and there's consequences to that at times that can have ramifications elsewhere. So how did that work out for you, being on faculty and being the wife of a pastor in the area? How did all that fit together for you at that time?
I mean, the Ferguson uprising went on for more than a year. And so protests across the street from the police department and in other locations as people would be arrested or there were other police killings. Those things all just sort of set the agenda. And what I found was that there were protest leaders, Ferguson frontline leaders who would have your number, and they would text you in these big group texts and say, you need to be at X place at X time. And there was this sense of urgency that you had to go to everything. And I had to figure out pretty quickly that I couldn't go to everything and do and live. And so there was often a real profound sense of guilt. And in the movement there were people like, oh, didn't see you last night, you catch that elbow. So that was real. And yet the perception now is that I was out there all the time. And so, but that's not what it felt like. It felt like I was missing most of it. And I don't really know what to make of that. And I think it's the perception that I was out there all the time is really just at Eden. I don't think that Ferguson movement that. But, that was, I think, my way of balancing it. Bill and I went to a lot of actions together. And oftentimes, particularly at the police department, we would wear a collar because we were putting ourselves in, and I'm thinking like October, this is all before the non-indictment outcome and that the grand jury process, which was just such a travesty. So all of the before that, building up to that, we were trying to put ourselves in positions, again, never like assuming to do that, but at the direction of the action leaders and protest leadership to be there, leveraging our institutional privilege, our white privilege on behalf of the activists and protecting them, standing between them and the police. So we would do that, and it was a kind of a theater. To do an action like that, you need the police. You need them to come out. Even though you're screaming at them for coming out. And it's this kind of dance that you do. And they need you to assert their power and to sort of build that rhetorical visual statement in their combat gear, that they're all that. And so, it has a kind of a liturgy to it. And we would learn sort of the rhythm of it, and we had this promise we would make to one another that if we made it past midnight, and we went home, we could have protest pancakes before we and we're both a sucker for carbs and sugars. So that was something we did, and that was a way we built community, because we often would have people over to have protest pancakes, and that was a way it became sustainable and felt like part of our home and part of our family, and yet this part of this community work we were doing, and things just became much more porous during those years.
Yeah.
And then Ferguson, soon after the Ferguson uprising, a whole new scenario of the Stockley protests around the murder of Anthony Lamar Smith and the Jason Stockley getting off as Darren Wilson did. So so that was like another round. And Cori Bush, Pastor Cori Bush, who's now our congresswoman here in the 1st District, she was a part of that front line, and many other leaders that kind of organized that, Daryl Gray, and so that there we went again. So.
One of my former professors, this is when I was at Princeton. I don't like to talk about it very much, but I did go there.
You are in front of your president of your seminary now.
I'm not saying that this.
How
is a better
dare
seminary.
you?
I'm just saying.
I went to Princeton.
I know, right? Doesn't it sound so
like
pretentious?
It's just there's no judgment. It's just information. Mark Lewis Taylor, who wrote a wonderful book called The Executed God, talks about these theatrics of state terror and the interactions between kind of this liturgy that you had talked about. And one of my friends here in the DMin program is working on a project on the liturgy of protest and care after protest, and those things are all super, super important. And you had mentioned something I kind of want to stick on a little bit, because I don't think we talk about it enough. Especially, looking around, the 3 people around this table were all white people.
Yes.
And we care deeply about these issues. And I think, especially as, we're all leaders in our positions in some form or fashion in our ministries. And I think it's easy for us to slip into wanting to, when these events happen, we want to slip into the leadership there and take the reins of it. And there's so much value in stepping back and following Black leadership and following the communities of the people that are being oppressed and taking their lead. Can you speak to that a little bit, as both from the perspective of Ferguson or elsewhere, kind of how that fits into your ministry and how that's been a part of your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think impacted people need to be the people who we consult with about how to advocate and be in solidarity on their behalf.
Yeah.
And that goes for protests as well. And I think there was a lot of, especially during Ferguson, many mistakes made. And I made mistakes. I remember it's the 1-year anniversary, and it's another time I was being arrested.
Oh.
It was a huge action. It was a massive national action on the Justice Department downtown on the Eagleton building. And we practiced the action. I loved this in the Episcopal Cathedral. So the bishop and the dean of the cathedral at the time cleared the cathedral of its chairs, and it was just this big open cavernous space, and they opened it for the practicing of this action that we were going to have on the street. And Wayne Smith was the bishop at the time, and he was in his full bishop liturgical garb, and I walked up to him and I said, "This is why we have cathedrals. Practice action."
Yeah.
And he said, "I think so. I think that might be why." I said, "So when you're, having to heat this thing in the winter, just for them."
Right. Yeah.
But that day was really a powerful day, and we got lots of instruction. The leadership of the action was entirely impacted folks, all Black and brown folks, and people they had brought in. So professional organizers. Okay. And one of those people when I was arrested, so it was a big arrest, and we had this, we went through in lines, and we broke through these different kind of barricades and sat in the doorway of the Justice Department. And I mean, there were hundreds of us.
Right.
And there may have been maybe 100 of us or 50 of us who did that second part where we went over the barricade and did that. And we knew that that would mean we would get arrested because there was some charge about, I mean, literally like blocking the doorway of a federal building,
Right.
you know, like
They'll find whatever they
They'll find, yeah.
guilty as charged.
They'll see.
But that, you know, doing all that, and it's hot and it's scary, and you're with people who are really angry, and people are pumped up, and the chants are going. And there was, through Ferguson, a chant that became very iconic, which is the Assata Shakur chant. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. And that is not a chant that white people should lead, you know. But I didn't really fully know that. I mean, I had seen all kinds of people lead that chant.
Right.
I had never led that chant. It's a call and response. So the leader starts it, and then you reply, and you go back and forth like that. And when it came to the time that they were arresting me, sitting down the door, they dragged me up, and it was very ceremonial, these plastic handcuffs. Nothing. I was going to go into a holding cell with others. Maybe others had different experiences, but this was not. I was arrested in very different circumstances than that, but this felt like a very ceremonial arrest. And I mean, Cornel West got arrested. We were all in, you know, so and when they dragged me up, you know, they're taking me to the door, and I yelled out the Assata chant. And Lisa Fithian, who is a national organizer, after the action, after I got out of jail, a bunch of us got out of jail, and we were all hanging out on the steps. She was with Oseago Sekou, and they, who is a good friend through Ferguson organizing, is an important organizer here in town. They came up to me, and Lisa was like, in Lisa's way, she was like, "Hey, Deb, don't ever do that again." and I was like, and she's like, "No, stop with your guilt and your apologizing. Just learn. Show up next time. Just don't do it again. Like, you need to be here, but you don't need to be here like that." Again, like a profound learning. And I mean, so many mistakes, so many times along the way. But I think if you don't put yourself in that position, you aren't, not to say that I should have made that mistake, but you're going to make mistakes. That's the thing. If you're in this fraught environment, you will need to say you're sorry, and you will need to hear somebody check you, and it can be in public. And it can be incredibly uncomfortable. Sometimes it's online. And it, you know, all of that has been something to learn from. So, about what your lane is.
Right.
And what voices should be elevated.
And I think that's so important for just people to hear that, you know, because I think that does stop a lot of people from getting involved, is because they're afraid they're going to misstep, or they're going to misspeak, but, you know, hearing from someone who's, you know, been doing this and was a part of this really important moment, say that this was a learning opportunity for you after, I mean, I think that's going to be impactful for a lot of people who may be thinking about stepping into this work in some form or fashion, but are afraid of the judgment of getting it wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think white supremacy kind of governs us to think we can't make mistakes. So just to kind of get into it enough to know that which is, I mean, we're all working for liberation here. And this isn't a charitable act,
Yeah.
Sure.
right? I need to learn. I need to grow. I need to change. And that I'm not going to learn that without being in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a person in the movement who I haven't mentioned yet, from whom I learned so much about this work, was Mama Cat, Kathy Daniels, who organized this whole part of the movement that was built around caring for people, feeding people.
Yeah.
And that was really where my activism in Ferguson kind of got organized from, the regular going to protests to being a part of Mama Cat's community and her work.
Yeah.
That's kind of was my second phase.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of the activist community kind of had been compelled by Mama Cat and what I would call her ministry.
Yeah.
We ended up giving her an honorary degree from Eden,
Yeah.
an honorary doctorate. And that was just so fitting because the ministry of Jesus is just deep and thoroughly in the work that she does through pot bangers.
Yeah.
So that was a very important place to continue to learn from her and from the community in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And our work had to be about love as we prepared food. And I'm using the past tense because Mama Cat's moved from St. Louis. So we aren't active in pot bangers in the way we were. She comes back to town for several events a year and we do those, and that's wonderful. But for those years that we were cooking weekly to share food with unhoused community, we were really focusing on building a space of community that wasn't governed by the commitments and values of white supremacy.
Wow.
And it was, shall we say, always an opportunity for white people to learn more. And she was just so good at it, at helping us see or calling somebody in to come alongside somebody and kind of resist the, inclination to be a Karen or whatever.
Yeah.
And that was another phase of this kind of organizing and community for me. That was another place where that learning happens.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm curious if you could, because we've talked a lot about learning, and you mentioned, the deep ministry of Jesus. And we talked a bit about this on the episode we did a few weeks back with Jacoby. We talked a lot about Oscar Romero and our trip to El Salvador, and we talked a lot about Oscar Romero's conversion to this type of work and this type of activism. And I'm curious for you, obviously you were, you became active in Ferguson, but in terms of your passion for this work of liberation and this work of fighting on behalf of the oppressed, how did you arrive there? Was this a household you were raised in? Were you raised in this atmosphere? Did you read your way to it through scholarship? How did you get on that track to begin with?
It's funny you ask that because I was on the board of MCU, which is a faith-based community organizing organization, and they have a national leadership training. And so I did national leadership training now 6 or so years ago, maybe more. I can't remember exactly. It was before COVID.
Yeah.
And
that's the only way we measure time now.
They really push you to identify why you're in this work. What is your self-interest? Why do you do this? It's really hard for white people to do that, other than that, well, I'm a good person. I want to be a good person. What is it about you and your biography? And I really have, you ask about my family of origin. I mean, I was born and raised in St. Louis. No, my parents were not activists.
Yeah.
And kind of grew up with a little bit of disdain for people who did stuff like that. Why they got to make such a big deal out of every, kind of.
That's what you say about a lot of things, Kyle.
Please not in front of Deb. We don't make these jokes here.
Sorry.
You're embarrassing me.
So that I kind of was formed probably not to be somebody who stepped outside of the
Right.
box, right?
Yeah.
So I think it probably was college and the feminist movement and learning about these systems.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I didn't learn about that in high school. So some in high school, but then
Sure.
college and then certainly seminary.
Yeah.
And I just remember in seminary realizing like I'm taking a road here that is
Yeah.
in some, and I still have a great relationship with my family and very, my parents were very proud of me
Yeah.
I don't want you to think that I became a pariah or something,
Yeah.
but I realized I was not going the way that I think my folks thought I would go. And that I remember I went to Amherst College in Massachusetts. I remember telling some friends of mine my senior year, I'm going to go to seminary. And it was like I was coming out. Like it was a big, scary moment.
Yeah.
I'm going to seminary. And they were like, what?
Yeah.
Why would it was the early 80s, it was 1984. Everybody was going to Wall Street to make money.
Yeah.
Like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
You're supposed to go to law school. You're supposed to get one of these Wall Street
Sure.
jobs. You're an idiot.
Yeah.
And I mean, Amherst College started as a seminary,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
but I think I was the only person in my class of 445 people or something that
Yeah.
went to seminary.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, big, huge culture shift there over
Yeah.
those several hundred years. So, I think and so how I answered that question at national leadership training finally for me, and I don't know that it was satisfactory to anybody, but it became satisfactory for me. Like in terms of my family of origin, I'm the middle child of 4. I'm third in the birth order, and I'm the second girl,
Okay.
bookended by boys.
Yeah.
And I was bullied at home and I was bullied in school. And I hate that. I hate when people I hate it and fear it viscerally. And when I see that kind of cruelty, I have always been, I was the one person in my family that would speak up to my father and say, stop saying that, or don't talk to mom that way. And I'm not trying to act like I'm a hero or anything. It's just who I am.
Yeah.
And that I think that's kind of the personality trait that then combined with this academic, historical, intellectual formation in school. And that was because I was in theological education, and theological education is magic because it's about being in community. I had the lanes to see how there are so many people in the world who are working on behalf of fighting bullies.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And, I kind of found my people that way. And yeah, I did choose to pursue an academic track, but I knew I would be activating the traditions, particularly biblical traditions of the faith. I always had a heart to be activating them on behalf of those who were either being mistreated by the church, LGBTQIA people, particularly by the broader society. And so that sense of purpose and my own individual experience as a kid growing up kind of came together
Yeah.
in that.
Yeah.
So I think that's it. I don't think it's heroic. I think it's just kind of what I did. So before, when I was first on the faculty, the big issue in the Presbyterian Church was around human sexuality.
Yeah.
And because I was on the faculty here at Eden, I had the latitude, because we were an open and affirming school,
Yeah.
to be able to speak out.
Right.
And that became something I did, and in the PCUSA that I was known for, so then I ended up being like an expert witness at these trials where they're trying pastors to take away their ordinations for having done same-sex marriages.
Yeah.
Same, among same gender loving people.
Yeah.
And even when they were legal, like in places like California and Massachusetts,
Yeah.
the church was still putting these people on trial. So my scholarship always had a kind of a fighting the system, like I was doing scholarship in that way, So I think that that was all kind of part of who I am and was. And so as Eden's student body really began to significantly change, and we were, the student body was like 5% Black when I first started here. And we had a couple of board people who really challenged us on that, and that was good.
Yeah.
Luther Smith was our faculty and curriculum leader, and he was just, this is not acceptable. We need to be more of a resource to the church in St. Louis than this, and the Black church in particular. And so the board very importantly opened up financial resources for that around scholarship. We created racial ethnic minority scholarships, and those, really added to the number of Black and brown students who came here. And that really changed my life, because that was when I feel like my education really began in terms of how racism impacts people in this country, and how the church is and isn't an agent for good in that. And just started that conversation for me. And hearing people's experience. And then, through that, when Michael Brown was murdered, it was like that was a lane then that our students just poured into. And of course, we on the faculty followed.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Deb, we're so thankful for your time. This has been phenomenal. But before we close, we wrap up with all of our guests. We kind of ask them this final question. The work that we do in this progressive Christianity movement can be very tiring and lonesome at times. And I know there are times in my life that I have felt isolated because of that and kicked out of certain systems. And I'm sure that you have felt that way too, being kind of a minority voice in some of these ways. So what keeps you coming back to this line of work, this work of ministry in a progressive movement? And what motivates you to keep going forward?
Well, when I was the dean and teaching a lot, it was students.
Yeah.
And their passion for their communities and their testimonies about their communities' experiences. And that always was a really clear kind of sharing of why for me. Why do we do this? Now that I'm president and I don't have as much in interaction with students, and I really miss that. I teach this DMIN class, and I teach in our seminars for ministry formation with other colleagues called PCL, Progressive Christian Leader Seminars. But I'm not teaching like courses anymore in the same way. And so I'm not as in with students. And like this year, I really have had to work to get to know first level students. And that's a weird, but so now that it's shifted from students, it's really the congregations and communities that support the seminary or that I'm engaged with, learning about them and the work they're doing. They do amazing work all over the country. And our alumni, oh my gosh, I am just the biggest fan of our alumni for their courage and faithfulness in pursuing ministries of social justice, witness, and transformation in their contexts, in collaboration with all kinds of impacted communities and their leaders, as well as interfaith and ecumenical leaders, and doing that while they're facing things like COVID and the institutional transformation of the church and the whole, you all know this, the whole challenges about membership and attendance and programming and how you do what you do. They're managing all of that while they're knowing that the first thing is the first thing, and that is that the church is called to be in and with the community and pursuing their ministries that way. And that's what keeps me coming back.
Wow.
That'll preach.
Man.
We're just going to put that up on Sunday.
We'll take David to take a week off.
Yeah, we don't need a sermon on Sunday.
Yeah.
Well, Deb, thank you so much for being with us. And a big thank you to the Office of the President here and Christy, who helped coordinate schedules and get all of this.
Best.
We love
shout out
Christy.
to Christy. She's the bomb. But many thanks to Deb for your time. Kyle, where can they find us?
You can find the Progressive Pastor Podcast on all social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we are dropping episodes every other Sunday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, with some more platforms potentially coming down the pipeline as well. But we thank you guys for joining us again. Thank you again, Deb, for being one of our first couple guests we've had on the program. We're so excited to see the work that you continue to do here at Eden. But thank you guys for listening. We will see you guys next time.
See you guys.